Dag Dief, agus cin féidiróð. Welcome to episode 17 of Conversation with the Druid. Friends, family, loved ones, viewers of all kinds. This is my first video where I am officially making it for adults. Instead of being kids only, see if I can get participation. Although mostly this is more diary type stuff as opposed to actual attempt to be an influencer. Although I promote and encourage parents to raise their kids in pagan households following a pagan tradition. Doesn't necessarily have to be Wicca, Irish pagan, or just whatever tradition you are. Raise your kids in that. Let them be strong, experience their faith, and my general thought is that once they get to be age 18, let them get baptized then, after they've had some time to experience other faith traditions and stuff like that, before they get inaugurated into any particular faith system. Typically that's the case, but given the propensity for the radical evangelicals to promote youth work and things like vacation Bible camps and stuff like that, is grooming and indoctrination in faith as well. So if they get to do it, there's no reason why we can't do it. Although generally I would say that stooping to their level is not necessarily the best way, but yeah. At any rate, so what's on my mind today? So there are a couple of things running through my head right now. We've got this thing going on where the Department of Justice has just removed over 200 faith designations from their chaplaincy registry. And down to 31, maybe 32 if you include the Church of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons. And general state of affairs for LGBTQIA plus rights. You've probably heard in the news that there have been a lot of things like anti-trans bills, like bathroom bills, stuff like that. Here's my answer to that. First off, whether you're trans or cis, we just want to use the bathroom. There's no unisex. There are very few unisex bathrooms available in most public spaces right now. And the few single-use ones there are color-coded for men or for women. And these bathroom bills are designed to exclude transgender people from using the appropriate bathroom for their gender identity. However, we just want to use the bathroom. Not trying to assault anyone, accost anyone. We just want to use the bathroom, plain and simple. Why that matters to so many people, I don't know. However, there's another thing going on, like no men and girls sports or no boys and girls sports. First off, let's just cut to the chase. This whole segregation according to gender. If segregation according to race is wrong, Segregating according to gender is wrong. End of story, full stop. And you could argue, well, girls have different bodies. Sure, they have different shapes than men or boys, but that doesn't necessarily make them unqualified to be able to compete with them on the same level. If you give boys and girls the same adequate training, both of them will be equal to each other. And this whole obsession with boys will be boys, girls will be girls, whatever, stop it. You're raising. Get your thoughts together, don't get angry. Okay, let's start from the basics. Men are capable of experiencing sexualized trauma as well as women. In men's case, the first rejection of personal autonomy that they receive in their lives is being given, before they can consent to it, a circumcision of the penis. That's the first sexual trauma that boys receive in their training as men. I don't care what religion you are. There is absolutely no freaking reason why you need to circumcise a child that's less than a year old. Other than the fact that you can get away with it as their parents, or their dogs are following their parents' wishes. This Jew-Gentile thing is absurd. If they later decide, once they reach the age of consent, which these days is 18, although sometimes I feel like it should be 24, because that way they're of legal drinking age as well as legal to fight in the army and stuff like that. It's just that the whole thing is centered around societal norms surrounding gender that, for the most part, are socially constructed rather than biologically constructed. And anyone with a postgraduate degree in biology will tell you the variations in chromosome markers that make up male and female bodies. Like, you can have XY chromosomes, you can have XX chromosomes, you can have XYY, you can have XXY, and the list goes on and on. And even then, your genetic markers might give you an XY, but give you a masculine body, whatever the hell that means. I find this particularly poignant as I trace my transition or prepare for my transition, as I feel that in order to be the best advocate that you can for a person or a group of people, you have to walk a mile in their shoes. And while I cannot pass as a person of color, I can alter myself to pass as a more feminine version of myself. And if given the opportunity, would rather walk a mile in women's shoes as a woman than not, in order to be the best advocate that I can be for them. I feel that there are these distinctions that are made solely based on vibes, whatever you want to call it, that, well, I don't feel like, or I don't believe that. And it's like, why don't you feel that? Why don't you believe that? When there's nothing saying that you can't raise your girls in a way that has them able to be self autonomous. If what you fear is a self autonomous woman, then of course I can see why you wouldn't want to do that. But then again, that whole kind of thinking is morally and ethically reprehensible. And if you're a father or mother of a girl, and you agree with Nick Fuente, people like Nick Fuentes, who say, her body, my choice, then you are in serious need not only of psychiatric help, but you are also in need of child protective custody, child protective services coming in and taking custody of your child, whether they be a boy or a girl. Full stop. Now, this might be controversial. I don't care. But I will say, for the record, this has to stop. You cannot claim the moral high ground if you believe that everybody's bodily autonomy is subject to your own personal beliefs. And if you feel that you need to legislate other people's rights away because they don't agree with you, then there's something seriously wrong with you psychologically. And there's a growing instance, a growing pathology in this country, as well as around the world, of a psychopathy / sociopathy wherein just ignoring things that don't. So, when is the right time to intervene? If you see somebody stalking or just giving the appearance of stalking, it is all right to go up to that individual. Say a man's been following a woman, you've noticed that every time she stops, stuff like that, it's all right to go up to the person doing the following and say, hey, can I help you? Are you bothering this person? What's going on? And just making a general inquiry while not exacerbating the tensions between the first two people. But if you choose to interfere on something like, say, a woman getting an abortion because she has neither the funds to maintain a family or because of a complicating health choice that precludes the fetus from reaching viability once they are past the birth canal, out of the womb, so to speak, or that they are dead within the first trimester or second trimester and having to birth a corpse and calling it manslaughter if they try to abort the fetus before it becomes an infection that kills the mother, that is wrong. Full stop. Now you could say, well, I'm pro-life, pro-this, pro-that, and I don't believe in abortion. That's your personal privilege not to believe in abortion. That does not give you the right to legislate other people's access to abortion. How does this relate to spirituality? Nuance, not hard to say. Consent is very important. I have learned a lot over my years as a Druid adept, not the least of which is that half my relationships within the spirit world started as a marriage of force and not one of mutual respect. Even though they understood I was into sex magic and stuff like that, they did not actually ask if I wanted to have sex with them. They actually initiated it with me. And then after I got accustomed to it, then they're like, well, you should try to get more mortal acquaintance friendships so that you don't always have to be relying on the spirit world. But when you try to integrate non-spiritual people, like, that's the best way to describe it. Even if they're fellow pagans, they might not necessarily have the same background as far as sexual relationships with spirits, even though they know theoretically, according to the myths, the legends, and the lore, that the two have frequently had sexual relationships with each other. Sometimes consensual, sometimes not. And like with mortals, consent is a very big thing. I cannot emphasize it enough, and it has taken me from 1995 to 2011 to come to that understanding. Because all the books I have ever read from the late 1990s up until 2010 did not emphasize consent. They did not emphasize anything other than heterosexual, heteronormative, monogamous relationship dynamic. And that is a failing on the books that were provided. Also, another failing of them was that they did not prepare you for when the spirits actually said, yes, I'm listening. Elaborate. And if we like what you say, we will more than gladly give you what you're requesting and how to handle it. If the tradition in which you're participating in this case, Sassafras Grove for me, like they were, like the books, the teachings were emphasizing altered states of consciousness, how to achieve them. And other factors along those lines. But like I said, there is nothing about consent from either on the spirit side or the mortal side. And essentially, the prevailing opinion is that, like a demigod hero of the old tales, as long as you were brave and able to fulfill your promises and oaths, you could go anywhere, do anything, and accomplish anything on both the mortal and the spiritual realm. It has taken a lot of time and a lot of medication for me and my spirit family to finally reach an equilibrium with each other where neither of us are unduly influencing the other, and even they to promote their own stability, because no one aspect of deity talks to themselves and they can appear in multiple places at the same time. As a cooling effect, at least in my own personal gnosis, they've all started taking medications, like what I'm on, which is Invega Sustenna. But going back to what I was saying, consent is very important. If you take away consent, chaos ensues and bad things happen, both to good people and bad people and mediocre people, both on both sides of the veil. There's a further need, and this is something that I would like to discuss more with the local indigenous shamans, medicine healers, because the indigenous European methodologies for handling consent between the mortal and spiritual realms, as well as things like vision quests and stuff like that, has been so drastically altered by the Christian invasion, subjugation, and colonization of Europe, followed by the colonization attempts around the world and further Christianization and Islamification of the world, that I'm not saying that there are bad sides to Christianity or good sides, or that there are bad sides and good sides to indigenous methods. What I'm trying to say is that there used to be a place for people who were transgendered in indigenous societies. And this whole ethnic cleansing, Eurocentric, Islamocentric multiplication throughout the world, even to people who didn't request it, there is no place in capitalistic society for transgender people or LGBTQIA plus member people. And we pagans are also trying to fight for our rights to exist. It hasn't been immediately obvious, the direct targeting like there has with the LGBTQIA2S community, especially and particularly the trans community. But there's a war going on that we're trying to defend ourselves, peacefully preferably, because we don't want them to have the satisfaction of saying, well, we were right all along, they don't care for us, blah, 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 and all the other bullshit that goes into the right-wing propaganda machine of trying to other the libtards, the left, or whatever you want to call us. We're your friends, we're your family, we're your neighbors. We're your allies, supporters. And yet you refer to us as the enemy of the state. Where in the psychology of your head does this even sound remotely plausible, ethically correct, or morally sound? And it's that very thought that keeps me from saying, well, if they want a war, let's go give them a war. We're better than that. We're supposed to be better than that. This whole individualistic, I want to be a cowboy, I want to be a lone wolf, independent alpha, that's bullshit. In case you weren't aware, according to biology studies of actual wolf packs, the alpha male actually strings along at the end of the pack. The oldest participants of the pack go at the front, with the alpha female, the beta females, and the cubs in the center of the pack. And that the whole alpha concept was born watching hens' behavior amongst themselves. Not any hen, but chickens, domestic chickens. And this transliteration of behaviors from chickens to wolves is absolute bullshit. And I am sorry that I cannot make it any easier for you, but like I said, this shite has got to stop. Before we destroy our country, before we destroy ourselves. It is a cancer right now. The symptoms are most evidently expressed by what the Trump administration, or rather regime, is doing in terms of their actions and behaviors. They are the most corrupt, destructive force in the United States government that we have ever seen since the British Empire had us being subservient to the British East India Company, as well as the Dutch East India Company. And you may come at me in the comments and say, well, you're an idiot, you're a moron, you don't know what you're talking about. Look, I have a BA in history from Slippery Rock University. I may be transgender, I may be crazy at times, but I am not stupid. I can follow patterns. I have a brain, and I recognize when there are things that are morally correct, ethically correct, and the exact antithesis to both morally and ethically correct. And sometimes being ethically correct is not the same as being morally correct, because the two are not synonyms for each other. And following on that note, going on to the subject of spirituality for a moment, not to take away from what we've already been discussing, but going back to discussing the affairs between the other world and this world, the two sides of the veil between the worlds. Thinking of authors like Laura O'Brien, her workbook, Personal Gnosis Handbook on the Morgan. Well, beneficial, unless you have a trained therapist to assist you in doing some of those questions by yourself, you will not be able to answer all of the actions that are going to follow as a result. And you will find yourself in a position where you're like, am I crazy? Am I not crazy? Is this reality? And if you have nobody you can turn to say, because my complaint about Laura O'Brien is that she wants to control all aspects of access to, she's a gatekeeper. And I can understand why, because she wants to preserve Irish paganism. But when you're preserving what's supposed to be a living organism to the detriment of people trying to provide a legitimate response without adequate training, it's well enough to ask the questions, to journal and do shadow work and stuff like that. But if you're not prepared for the repercussions, go back to the conversation about consent between this world and the other world, you will wake up at 3 a.m. wondering whether or not you were literally insane. These are questions I should have asked myself a long time ago. But I had no one to mentor me. I had no one to say who had experience working with the Morrigan, Lenape, and the other spirits that I wound up being involved with sexually and emotionally. That could have said to me, this is not how they are portrayed in the lore. You might want to rethink that, or start asking these types of questions to make sure they are who they say they are. They don't do that. And so you need a professional therapist who is accepting and trained in indigenous practices, or at least accepting of faith traditions, of alternative faith traditions, to be open to the fact of working with you through these questions, through these comments, through these spiritual dialogues. And the problem with placing copyrights on what is supposed to be a new interpretation of old lore and calling yourself a Shanahi while maintaining exclusive privilege over who gets to tell what stories is, I think, demeaning to the whole role of the Shanahi as a whole. Now, what is a Shanahi, you may ask? It's the Irish word for storyteller. And they've glossed over, changed a few bits. It's an old tradition is what a Shanahi is. And they tell the old myths, sometimes Christianized, sometimes not, depending on the preference of the storyteller. And the old storytellers are dying away. They're few and far between because everybody has a cell phone these days, and they'd rather get their data from Google as opposed to going and sitting at someone's fireside, listening to them tell the old tales, the old stories on the correct way of being kings, the correct way of being druids, the right relationship between the various castes and classes and stuff like that, without violating the oaths and obligations. What is tolerated in one group is not necessarily tolerated in another group, and being hospitable to all, as well as giving proper judgments, true judgments, as opposed to opinions or false judgments, which false judgments and opinions can sometimes be equivocated in the lore. But that all taken into equal consideration means that we're not necessarily doing the right things right now. Now you may ask, what about the brain laws? They feel that women are inferior and can't act as witnesses. You're correct. But whether that is a traditional Irish perspective A Romanization imported by the Gauls fleeing the Roman occupation of Gaul to the British Isles and Ireland during the Gallic Wars. If that is a later introduction to the Gaels and Druids fleeing Britain, Wales, and Scotland during the Roman occupation of Britain in the 45 to 500 CE range, no one can say for certain. And the brand laws, as we know them today, were only written around, starting around the 12th century CE. So there's no telling what influenced the brand laws as they were written down at that time frame. And based on grave markers and stuff like that, women in the lore play, as well as in graves, what few graves there are, even though cremation was the more preferred method of burial, like in India, there were as many female warriors as there were male warriors. Boudica of the Iceni is just one of many examples of female Celtic rulers throughout the Celtic diaspora. And we cannot pretend otherwise, as much as certain individuals would like us to pretend otherwise. There were female druids. There were male druids. There were probably transgender druids, both transmasc and transfemme. There were chieftains of all sexualities and genders. I cannot provide a comprehensive list of sources, but I know people who can, and generally, if you ask politely, I shall provide a list and make a post of all the references and sources regarding Bandrui as well as Druid. Although at this point, everyone who wants to be a Druidect can be a Druidect, regardless of their masculine, feminine, or somewhere in between, or above and beyond the typical, stereotypical gender binaries and sexual binaries. And so, these are some thoughts I want to leave you with. Now, my next conversation with the Druid, as soon as I finish it, I'm going to read a letter aloud that I have written to my state and federal elected officials regarding the state of affairs in this country, the direction I feel it should be going, and stuff like that, because I want this as a matter of record. I'm sorry that this is a day late, but I've been dealing with some emotional issues recently. Not the least of which is a money problem and 2 months behind on rent. Missed a phone bill, and I'm hoping my service doesn't get cut off. So consider this a mutual aid request if you want to view it as such. I try not to do these things, but any help in this troubling time is acceptable. If you feel, however, that I'm not worthy of it because you don't agree with my opinion, more power to you. I'm not expecting anything. I have no expectations or desires. I just need help, and I'm asking for it. And if you would like to help, I will post my Venmo and make a post about it with my Venmo information. and stuff like that. So, anyway, Sanat, Sanawale, good afternoon to y'all. Thank you for listening to me. I'll see you on the upside of the creek for the next conversation with the Druid.